Hello, Sydney. Hello. Can I confess something? Sorry, I'm going to stand out of this light because it's going in my eyes and driving me mad. So a really weird thing happened to me, and I feel I should just sort of level with you right at the start. The first time I ever came to Australia, I landed, and somehow I got it completely wrong. And I thought I was speaking 2 days later, and I was speaking 2 hours after I landed. So I went to the Sydney Opera House, and I was fucked with jet lag like I am now. And I don't know about you, but until I was 40 years old, I genuinely thought jet lag was a myth. I'm now 45, and I'm like basically Joe Biden in the first presidential debate. Whenever I land anywhere, I'm like, what's happening? Why are they asking me questions? So I literally have not seen Australia at all, and I go on stage at the Opera House, and I'm sort of out of it and feeling a bit weird, and I made a really bad joke. So I was looking at the audience, I was thinking like, so I have to say, I'm really disappointed with Australia, because all throughout my childhood, every day, me and my grandmother religiously watched Sons and Daughters and The Young Doctors. And there'll be younger people in the audience who don't know what these were. These were Tolstoyan epics about Australian life. They were soap operas made by Reg Grundy, who made Neighbours. And I said, I'm really disappointed because I've been here for 2 hours, and I have not yet been kidnapped and replaced by an identical twin I never knew existed, right? Felt like a great joke, it's all right. Some people in the audience were nice and laughed. And then I said, I've got this really bad thing. If I make a joke and people don't laugh, I lean into the joke too far. So I said, is Reg Grundy still alive? And someone in the audience said yes. And I said, well, God should strike him dead for the way he lied to me about Australia, right? And someone made the noise you made. Anyway, I moved on. That was fine. Didn't think about it. 2 days later, I turned on the news, and Reg Grundy had died. So I now feel like whenever I speak to Australian audiences, I have the power to just strike any of you dead. So I'm tempted to ask you, is Scott Morrison still alive? But I'm going to resist that, sorry. No, do it. I want to talk to you about a big crisis that's happening in attention and focus, right? And I don't think you need me to tell you this, but there's a huge crisis in attention and focus. So the average office worker now focuses on any one task for less than 1 minute, and for every one child who was identified with serious attention problems when I was 7 years old, there's now 100 children who've been identified with that problem, right? And the reason this matters is I would say to anyone here, think about anything you've ever achieved in your life. Just picture something you're proud of, whether it's starting a business, being a good parent, learning to play the guitar, whatever it is, that thing that you're proud of required a huge amount of sustained focus and attention. And the evidence is really clear. When your ability to pay attention deteriorates, your ability to achieve your goals deteriorates, your ability to solve your problems deteriorates. You feel worse about yourself because you actually are less competent when you can't pay attention. You know, attention is our superpower. It is at the heart of all human achievement, whether sporting achievement, musical achievement, being a good friend, being a good parent. So a crisis in attention is in fact a crisis in being an effective human being. And I could feel that my own attention was getting worse for years, right? I could feel it in all sorts of ways. I'm someone who reads all the time. It was getting harder to read long novels. All the time I was being constantly thrown off course. There's an amazing study by a guy called Professor Michael Posner at the University of Oregon, who discovered if you're interrupted by something as simple as a text message, it takes you on average 23 minutes to get back to the level of focus you had before you were interrupted. So any of you might get a text while I'm talking. You think, oh, I'll just glance at this for a second. It'll take a second. It takes you that second to look at it, plus the 23 minutes it takes you to refocus your mind. But most of us never get 23 minutes without being interrupted. So we're constantly operating at this lower level of cognitive capacity. And I could feel this happening to me, and I thought, oh, I should research this. I should write about it. But to be honest, I just thought, I don't want to look at this. Because I think, A, the answers are obvious. Someone invented the smartphone, that screwed me over, and I don't have good enough willpower, right? I thought those are basically the two reasons. Maybe I'm getting older as well, maybe that's another one. I thought that's a bit of a buzzkill to research those things. And also I was just ashamed, I was embarrassed, right? I didn't want to think about it. And I only really began to research it because of a moment that happened to me. I've got a godson, And when he was 9, he developed a brief and unbelievably cute obsession with Elvis Presley. I think he was the last person in the history of the world to do a totally sincere impression of Elvis. He didn't know that it was a cheesy cliche, so it was unbelievably cute when he would do Jailhouse Rock. And every night when I would tuck him into bed, he got me to tell him the story of Elvis's life over and over again. Obviously, I skipped over the bit at the end where he shit himself to death on the toilet. And one night I was talking to him about it, and I mentioned Graceland, where Elvis lived. And I mentioned that people go there, like, to see it. And his whole face lit up, and he said, Johann, will you take me to Graceland one day? And I was like, sure, the way you do with 9-year-olds, next week I'll want to go to, like, the North Pole or Legoland or something. And he looked at me really intensely and said, no, do you really swear one day you'll take me to Graceland? And I said, I absolutely promise. And I didn't think of that moment again for 10 years until so many things had gone wrong. So when he was 15, he dropped out of school. And by the time he was 19, he spent literally almost all his waking hours. I know it sounds like hyperbole, it's absolutely not. He spent almost all his time alternating between his iPad, his iPhone, and his laptop. And his life was just a blur of WhatsApp, YouTube, porn, Snapchat. And it was almost like he was kind of whirring at the speed of Snapchat. Do you know what I mean? Where nothing kind of still or serious could get to him. And one day we were sitting in my flat in London. And the whole day I was trying to get a conversation going with him. And I just couldn't, right? And he's really smart. It wasn't a lack of intelligence. I just could not get any traction in his mind. And to be totally honest with you, I wasn't that much better, right? I was staring at my own devices. And I suddenly remembered this moment all these years before, and I looked at him and I said, hey, let's go to Graceland. And he looked at me totally blankly. He didn't even remember this moment all these years before, but I reminded him. I said, look, this is no way to live. Let's go on a road trip all over the South. Let's break this numbing routine. Then I thought ahead and I said, but you've got to promise me one thing, which is that when we go, you'll leave your phone in the hotel during the day because there's no point going, if you're just going to look at your phone the whole time. And he wasn't happy living about this, and he thought about it for a few minutes. He said, let's do it. I want to do it. And I think it was literally, 2 weeks to the day, we took off for New Orleans, where we went first. And a couple of weeks later, we got to the gates of Graceland. I'm sure some of you have been there. And it's a weird thing. When you arrive at Graceland now, this is even before COVID, there's no person to show you around. What happens is you arrive, they hand you an iPad, you put in earbuds, and the iPad shows you around, right? So it says go left, go right. Every room you go in, the iPad tells you a story about that room. And every room you go in, there's an image of that room on the iPad in front of you. So it has this kind of weird effect that everyone just walks around Graceland staring at the iPad, right? So we're kind of walking around. I'm getting a little bit kind of pissed off. I'm like, oh, people traveled a long way to be here. Why aren't they looking at it? And we got to the jungle room, which was Elvis's favorite room in Graceland. It's got loads of fake plants in it. They've kept it exactly as it was when he died. And I'll never forget them. There was this kind of middle-aged Canadian couple who was standing next to us. They must have been like early 50s, which I know is not middle-aged, but now I'm 45. I'm pretending that's the middle. And they were standing there, and the man said to his wife, honey, this is amazing. Look, if you swipe left, you can see the jungle room to the left. And if you swipe right, you can see the jungle room to the right. And I laughed like some of you, right? I was like, oh, it's funny, he's kidding. And I turned and watched them, and they were just swiping back and forth. And I leaned forward, and I said, but hey, sir, there's an old-fashioned form of swiping you could do. It's called turning your head, because you realize we're in the jungle room. You don't have to look at it on the internet. It's literally all around you in 3 dimensions. And they looked at me like I was insane and backed out the room. And I turned to my godson to laugh about it. And he was standing in the corner staring at Snapchat. Because from the moment we landed, he could not stop. He literally couldn't stop. And I went up to him. I did that thing that's never a good idea. I tried to grab the phone out of his hands. And I said to him, look, I know you're afraid of missing out, but this is guaranteeing that you'll miss out. You're not present in your own life. You're not showing up at the events of your own existence. This is no way to live. And he stormed off, understandably. So I wandered around Memphis on my own that day. And I found him that night in the Heartbreak Hotel where we were staying up the street. And he was sitting by the huge guitar-shaped swimming pool. And I went up to him, and I apologized for getting so angry. And he didn't look up from Snapchat, but he said, I know something's really wrong, and I don't know what it is. And I realized in that moment, we came away to get away from this problem of distraction, but there's nowhere to escape to. It was everywhere. It's the air we all breathe. And that's when I thought, okay, I need to investigate this, right? I need to figure out what's going on here. So I went on a big journey all over the world, from Moscow to Miami to Melbourne, not just to cities that begin with the letter M. I keep doing that in my head, I don't know why. And I interviewed over 200 of the leading experts in attention and focus. And what I learned is there's scientific evidence for 12 factors that can make your attention better or can make it worse. And once you understand those factors, it opens up a totally different set of solutions to these problems that I saw being put into place all over the world. The crucial thing to understand is your attention did not collapse. Your attention has been stolen from you by some really big and powerful forces. But once you understand them, we can begin to take them back. But I have to say, one of the earliest interviews I did was the most depressing. I'm going to get a bit feel good in a minute, but I just say it happened with an Australian. So there's a guy called Professor Roy Baumeister, who's the leading expert in the world. He's at the University of Queensland in Brisbane. I don't know why I just pointed in that direction. I have no idea where Brisbane is from here. He's the leading expert in the world on willpower. He did loads of really important experiments that loads of you will have heard of. He wrote a book called Willpower, right? So go to see him. I said, Professor Baumeister, I'm really interested in what we can learn from you about why so many of us are struggling to pay attention. And he said to me something like, the exact words are in the book, "Oh, it's really interesting you say that, because I've noticed I can't really pay attention anymore. I play Candy Crush a lot on my phone. I play these video games." And I was like, didn't you write a book called Willpower? Aren't you the leading expert on willpower in the world? And it's like that moment at the end of Invasion of the Body Snatchers where the guy realizes everyone's been fucking body snatched, right? You go and see him and he's saying he can't stop playing Candy Crush. So I wanted to really understand what was going on. And I'm going to go through some of these 12 factors, not all of them. But I'll start with one where I'd be very surprised if it wasn't playing out for everyone here to some degree, right? So I went to MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I can never say Massachusetts Institute of Technology, to interview one of the leading neuroscientists in the world, an amazing man named Professor Earl Miller. And he said to me, look, there's one thing you need to understand about the human brain more than anything else. You can only consciously think about one or two things at a time. That's it. This is a fundamental limitation of the human brain. The human brain has not changed significantly in 40,000 years. It's not going to change on any time scale any of us are going to see, unless you let Elon Musk put an implant in your brain, which really, don't do that. This is part of our nature. You can only think about one or two things at a time. But what's happened is we've fallen for a kind of mass delusion. The average teenager now believes they can follow 6 or 7 forms of media at the same time. The rest of us are not that far behind them before we get too smug. So what happens is scientists like Professor Miller, scientists all over the world, including some here in Australia, get people into labs and they get them to think they're doing more than one thing at a time, and they monitor them. And what they discover is always the same. You can't do more than one thing at a time, but what you can do is juggle very quickly between tasks. You can be like, wait, what did you just ask me? What is this message on WhatsApp? What does it say on the TV there about the American election? What is this message on Facebook? Wait, what did you ask me again? So we're constantly juggling like that all the time. And it turns out this juggling comes with a really big cost. The technical term for it is the switch cost effect. It's a term everyone should know, the switch cost effect. It just says when you switch between tasks, it comes with a surprisingly big cost. You remember less of what you do. You make far more mistakes. You're much less creative. But I remember when I first learned that, thinking, okay, I get it. That's bad. I can see the reality of that. But this is like a small effect, right? It's not a big deal. It's shockingly big. I'll give you an example of a small study that's backed by a wider body of evidence. Hewlett-Packard, the printer company, got a scientist in to study their workers, and he split them into 2 groups. And the first group was told, get on with your task, whatever it is, you're not going to be interrupted. And the second group was told, get on with your task, whatever it is, but at the same time, you've got to answer a heavy load of email and phone calls, so pretty much how all of us live, right? And at the end of it, the scientist, Dr. Glenn Wilson, tested the IQ of both groups. The group that had not been interrupted scored, on average, 10 IQ points higher than the group that had. To give you a sense of how big that is, if we all sat down now and smoked a fat spliff together and got stoned, our IQs would go down in the short term by 5 points. So being constantly interrupted in the short term, in the way that most of us are, is twice as bad for your intelligence as getting stoned. You'd be better off sitting at your desk, smoking a spliff and doing one thing at a time, than you would sitting at your desk, not smoking a spliff and being constantly interrupted. Now, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. You're better off neither smoking a spliff nor being interrupted, but you begin to see how big an effect this is. This is why Professor Miller said to me, we are living in a perfect storm of cognitive degradation, right? We're operating at a lower level of mental capacity as a result of these interruptions. So let's think about something that's the opposite of that state, right? So if we think about that state as the switch cost effect, broken down into these tiny little parcels, we're constantly spinning between things. There's an opposite state to that, one that everyone here will have experienced at some point in their life. The kind of fancy term for it is a flow state. A flow state is when you're doing something and you just really get into it, and your sense of time falls away, your sense of ego falls away, and at the end of it, you're like, what? Is it 4 o'clock? What happened, right? So different people get flow from different things. Some people it's making bagels, some people it's brain surgery. For me, it's writing. We all have something. One rock climber said, when you get into flow, it's like you are the rock you're climbing, right? And flow is really important for thinking about attention, because flow is simultaneously the deepest form of attention people can provide. And once you get into it, it's the easiest form of attention to provide. Once you get into a flow state, it's not like, oh, how do I memorize the names of all these presidents or whatever? It just comes really, really deeply and easily. So obviously I was thinking, wow, I was looking at this evidence, like, wow, if this is, the deepest form of focus we've got and the easiest, if it's like a gusher of attention that exists inside all of us, where do we drill to get it, right? How do we get into a flow state? So I went to interview the scientist who discovered this concept and spent 60 years researching it, an amazing man named Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. It took me so long to learn how to say his name, I'm going to say it repeatedly. It's spelt like very confusingly. He's Hungarian, was Hungarian. Sadly, I did the last interview he did because he died not long afterwards, not because of me. I hope. He discovered loads of things about flow states. But if you want to maximize your chance of getting into a flow state, there's 3 things in particular he learned that struck me as particularly important for all of us, right? So if you want to, it's no guarantee, but if you want to maximize your chances, you can do 3 things. The first thing you've got to do is set aside a significant amount of time to do one thing. Just one thing. If you're trying to do 2, 3, 4, 5 things, you will not get into flow. The second thing you've got to do is choose a goal that is meaningful to you. You know, one expert said to me, a frog will focus more on a fly than on a stone because the fly is meaningful to the frog and the stone is not. Attention evolved to attach to meaning. The more meaningful something is, the easier it is to flow into it. And the third thing, and this seemed to me a bit counterintuitive at first, is it will help if you push yourself to the edge of your abilities. Flow begins at the edge of your comfort zone. So let's say you're a medium talent rock climber, right? You don't just want to climb, your garden wall. That's too easy. You're not going to get into flow doing that. Equally, you don't want to suddenly try and climb Mount Everest. That would be overwhelming. You won't get into flow. You want to climb a slightly higher and harder rock face than the one you did last time. So if you do these 3 things, you set aside a significant amount of time to do one thing, make sure that thing is meaningful to you, and push yourself to the edge of your abilities, but not beyond it. It's a difficult balance to do. You hugely increase your chances of getting into a flow state. But even as soon as I say that, you can see how the environment in which we're living is militating against a lot of those factors, right? Try just setting aside a load of time to do one thing, right? Even if the average Fortune 500 CEO only gets 30 minutes a day to themselves to think, and that's generally spread throughout the day, right? So you think about how that's broken down, and it was fascinating to me how many of the factors that are harming our attention, some of them make intuitive sense as soon as you hear them, and some of them are mind-blowing. So think about sleep, for example. We sleep 20% less than people did a century ago. It's kind of extraordinary. The average British child sleeps 85 minutes less than the average British child did in 1945. Huge transformation, right? Unprecedented in the history of our species. And I went to interview one of the leading sleep experts in the world, an amazing man named Dr. Charles Czeisler. I interviewed him at Harvard Medical School. And he said to me, even if nothing else had changed, except that we sleep so much less, that alone would be leading to a really significant attention crisis. And there's lots of reasons why, but one really haunts me that was explained to me by several scientists. The whole time you're awake, your brain is generating something called metabolic waste. One scientist calls it brain cell poop, which helped me to understand it. So it's building up the whole time you're awake, right? And when you go to sleep, when you get into deep sleep, usually in the 7th hour, a watery fluid washes through your brain, your cerebral spinal fluid channels open up, and this brain cell poop gets carried out of your brain, down into your kidneys, eventually out of your body. If you don't get 8 hours sleep a night, your brain literally doesn't clean itself properly. You know that feeling when you're tired and you feel like you're almost clogged up? That is not a metaphor. A lot of us are walking around clogged up a lot of the time. Our brains are literally clogged with metabolic waste. If you stay awake for 19 hours, which doesn't sound like much to me, your attention deteriorates as much as if you've got legally drunk. So sleep is a huge factor. I can talk about solutions to all these things in a minute, but I'll think about one that really blew my mind. Food. The way we eat is really profoundly affecting our ability to focus and pay attention. I want to stress, I'm not saying this with any judgment. So one of the low points in my life was a couple of days before Christmas in 2009. I went to my local branch of KFC in East London, where I lived at the time. And I went in, it was lunchtime, and I said my standard order, which is so disgusting, I'm not going to repeat it to a healthy South by Southwest audience. And the guy behind the counter said, "Oh, Johann, I'm really glad you're here." I was like, all right. And he went off behind he said, "Wait a minute." And he went off behind where they fry all the chicken and everything. And he came back with a massive Christmas card in which they'd written, "To our best customer." And everyone had written these personal messages. And one of the reasons my heart sank is I thought, but this isn't even the fried chicken shop I come to the most. How can this be happening to me? It was a very low point. It's only Ozempic that subsequently saved me from that, but that's a subject of another book. Ask me about it later if you want. So, no judgment here, but what I learned from a load of nutritionists and scientists who've studied this is that kind of diet that's taken over our lives is really negatively affecting our attention. So imagine you have the standard British or Australian breakfast, right? You have sugary cereal or you have white bread with butter on it. What that does is it releases a huge amount of energy really quickly into your brain. It releases a lot of glucose. And it feels great. You're like, whoa, I'm awake, I'm ready for the day. But it releases so much glucose so quickly that you'll get to your office, or your kid will get to their school desk, and about an hour and a half, 2 hours later, you'll have an energy crash, you'll have a slump, your glucose levels slump, and then you get what's called brain fog, where you can't really focus very well. You get a kind of patch of brain fog until you have another sugary, carby treat, another burst of glucose, another crash. So the way Dale Pinnock, who's one of the leading nutritionists in Europe, put it to me, is we live on a kind of roller coaster of energy spikes and energy crashes throughout the day, right? Energy spikes and energy crashes. Whereas if you have, say, in the morning, porridge with blueberries, I know it sounds disgusting, some people do. If you have that, what that does is it releases energy very steadily. You don't get those peaks and those crashes, and you can pay attention much better. So you begin to see, it's one of the funny things with attention. The more you look at it, the more you begin to see that there are so many different factors that are weighing on us, that are affecting us in our kids' schools, in our offices. There's an array of factors. And it's almost like, as one of the scientists put it to me, a kind of perfect storm has hit us. So many factors are simultaneously undermining our attention. And obviously, look, I'm interested in these subjects to some degree intellectually, but the main reason I wanted to understand this is I want solutions, right? I don't like kind of whiny books that go, "Oh, bad news, everyone, we're fucked," right? I want to figure out how we solve these problems. Not least because a lot of this is really recent, right? We're not talking, most of the factors, almost all of the factors that are negatively affecting our attention have happened in the lifetime of everyone in this room, or massively accelerated in the lifetime of this room. Okay, we're not so old, that's fairly, this is recent history, right? And what I learned is, for all of the factors that are harming our attention, for all of the 12 factors with one exception, there are 2 levels at which we've got to deal with it. I think of them as defense and offense. There are loads of things that we can all do immediately today in our personal lives to improve our focus and our attention. I'm going to, so I thought I'm going to write it down because the jet lag is killing me. And I go through loads in the book. You can ask me about loads. I'll give you an example of 2 that I recommend all of you do literally today. When you leave here, don't take out your phone and do it now, but when you leave here, Google K-Safe. It's just the letter K and then safe. I should totally have bought shares in this company before my book came out, by the way, because they've gone up. So it's very simple. A K-Safe is a plastic safe. You take off the lid, you put in your phone, you put on the lid, you turn the dial at the top and push it, and it'll lock your phone away for anything between 5 minutes and a whole day. And once it's locked, if there was like, fire in your house, you could smash the K-Safe, but you'd have to buy another K-Safe, and they're a bit expensive, so you don't want to do that, right? I use my K-Safe 3 hours a day to do my writing. I would not have finished any of my books if I didn't have that. Whenever my friends come round for dinner, I am a phone Nazi. I insist everyone put their phone in the K-Safe. And people at first are like, oh no, And I always say to people, and I found it difficult at first as well, say, the pleasure of us actually paying attention to you and you actually paying attention to us is so much greater than whatever shitty Instagram update you're going to have to wait 2 hours for, right? And some people are like, oh, what if there's an emergency? We've created this fantasy of an emergency. Remember, all of us when we grew up, when you left your house, if there was an emergency, you didn't find out until you went back to your house, right? We didn't die, the world continued, right? Like, this idea that we all need to know where all of us are immediately is this kind of bizarre fantasy that's emerged quite recently, right? It's okay. You're not Joe Biden. You don't need to give orders. It's all right. So buy a K-Safe. I would also recommend you all download an app called Freedom. It's a really simple app. So let's say you're addicted to a particular website. Let's say it's Instagram, eBay, Pornhub. A few of you looked a little bit guilty there. Let's say you're addicted to that, right? You can say to the app, don't let me go on this website for the next 5 minutes, the next day, however long you want. And once you push the button, if you go to that website or that app, a little bird appears and it says, you have been set free, and you have to do something else. Or you can get it to cut you off from the entire internet. So I have social media blocked permanently on all my phones, because I do not want people to say at my funeral, Johann spent a lot of time on Instagram, right? That is not how I want to spend my life, right? And how you spend your hours is how you spend your life, right? There's no point, you are the sum total of your habits. There's no point saying to yourself, I'm the kind of person who reads Tolstoy, but I'll just look at Instagram for the next rest of my life, right? We have to make these choices. So there are loads of things like that. You can ask me about more of them. But I want to be really honest with you all, because I don't feel people who communicate with the public about attention are leveling with people. I am passionately in favor of these individual changes. I've made loads of them myself. You should do them. They'll make you and your kids' lives much better. But on their own, they are not going to totally solve this problem. Because the truth is, this crisis did not happen because you had bad habits, or I had bad habits, or our kids had bad habits. This happened because of some really big environmental changes. The way I feel about this is, it's a bit like someone at the moment, all day someone is pouring itching powder over us, and then at the end of the day, that person is leaning forward and going, hey buddy, you should learn how to meditate, then you wouldn't scratch all the time. And you want to go, fuck off, I'll learn to meditate, that's really valuable, but you need to stop pouring itching powder on me the whole time, right? At some point, we have to not only defend ourselves from these forces, we have to go on offense against the forces that are doing this to us. I know that sounds really fancy and abstract, but I want to talk to you about how we can do that and some places where it's already begun. So, I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley for the book, interviewing people who designed key aspects of the world in which we now live. And one of the things that most struck me was how sick with guilt they feel about what they've done. I'll give you an example. This great guy called James Williams, who used to work at the heart of Google. He designed Gmail partly to make it more addictive. And one day he was speaking at a tech conference where the audience was literally the people who designed the stuff your kids are using today. And he said to them, if there's anyone here who wants to live in the world that we're creating, please put up your hand. And nobody put up their hand. Not long afterwards, he quit and became a really important philosopher of attention at Oxford University now. And so people in Silicon Valley, the people who were responsible for doing this, kept explaining to me what they'd done and how it works. And at first, when I heard it, I was like, oh, this doesn't sound right. It sounds both too simplistic and almost like conspiratorial. And they kept going, right, no, believe me, we literally designed it. We can tell you. So if any of you now, please don't, but if any of you now open TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, which I refuse to call X, if you open any of them now and begin to scroll, those companies begin to make money out of you immediately in two ways. The first way is really obvious. You see advertising. Okay, no one needs me to explain that. The second way is much more important. Everything you ever do on these apps, including in your so-called private messages, is scanned and sorted by their artificial intelligence algorithms to figure out who you are and what makes you tick. What makes you happy, what makes you horny, what makes you sad, what makes you angry. So imagine that you've ever told anyone on these apps that you like, I don't know, Donald Trump, Bette Midler, and you told your mum you just bought some nappies, right? It's going to figure out, okay, if you like Donald Trump, you're probably right-wing. If you like Bette Midler and you're a man, you're probably gay. No disrespect to any straight men who like Bette Midler. I don't actually believe you, but all right. And if you just bought some nappies, you've got a baby, right? So it's gathering tens of thousands of pieces of information about this, like this about you. These apps know way more about you than your neighbors or even many of your friends, right? Because your neighbors and friends don't read your Facebook messages at 3 in the morning, right? Unless something's gone wrong. So it knows a huge amount about you. And it's gathering this information for a few reasons, but the most important one is it's figuring out what to show you next in order to keep you scrolling. Because every time you open the app and begin to scroll, they begin to make money. The longer you scroll, the more money they make, because the more ads you see. Every time you close the app, that revenue stream disappears. So all of this genius in Silicon Valley, all this AI, all these algorithms, when it's applied to social media, is designed to do one thing and one thing only. It's designed to figure out how to get you to open the app as often as possible and scroll as long as possible. That's it, right? It is a machine designed to frack your attention, as my friend Tristan Harris, who also used to work at the heart of the machine, said to me. And I was saying to them, that can't be right. You know, there must be more going on than that. I remember one of them saying to me, look, the head of KFC may be a perfectly nice person, probably is, but all he or she cares about in their professional capacity is how often did you go to KFC this week and how big was the bucket you bought. That's it, right? And if you become obese, that's not their problem. It's someone else's problem. In the same way, all these companies care about is how often did you open the app, how long did you scroll. That is the sole measure of success. You are judged within the company about whether you got better than that or worse at that. And by the way, they are getting better and better at it every day. Think about how much more addictive TikTok is than Facebook, right? As Paul Graham, who's one of the biggest investors in Silicon Valley, said in an interview with someone, the world is on course to be much more addictive in the next 40 years than it was in the last 40. So you've got this machinery that is set up, right? And at first when I learned that and absorbed it, I just thought, oh, fuck, we're trapped in the matrix, right? It just makes you feel really hopeless. You're like, this is just so overwhelming. But then the people who designed it said to me, no, this should give you much more hope. Because what it makes you realize is a lot of the damaging attentional effects are not inherent to the technology. They're inherent to the current business model of the technology, and we can change that business model. So I only began, and that can sound a bit weird at first, but I only really began to understand it when it was explained to me by an analogy that lots of people here in this room lived through. Some of the younger people have just missed it, but most of us did. So most of the people in this room, when we were kids, the only kind of petrol you could buy in Australia, in Britain, was leaded petrol, right? I can remember my mum putting it in a Mini. I can remember the smell of it, right? And it was discovered by scientists that exposure to lead is really bad for your brain, and particularly bad for children's ability to focus and pay attention. So what happened? And of course, if it's in the petrol, it's in the air, everyone was breathing in a shit ton of lead. It was really bad for us. So what happened was a group of ordinary mums, what were called housewives at the time, banded together here in Australia and said, Why are we allowing this? Why are we allowing the lead industry to fuck up our kids' brains, right? And it's really important to notice what they didn't say. They didn't say, so let's ban cars, let's go back to the horse and cart. Just like none of us are saying, let's ban technology, let's all convert to being the Amish, no disrespect to any Amish who are here, you're kind of cheating if you are. Right, that's not what we're saying, right? What they said is, let's get rid of the specific aspect of this technology that's screwing up our brains and replace it with a different technology that does the job better, that doesn't screw up our brains. And these mums, they fought like hell for their children against the lead industry. We forget this now, but it was a really hard fight. There was denial that lead harmed people's brains. There was a campaign demonizing them. But they fought and fought. And it followed the classic pattern of all political movements, successful political movements that was described by Mahatma Gandhi. First they ignored them, then they laughed at them, then they fought them, then they won. As we all know, there's no more leaded petrol in this country. In fact, Venezuela just became the last country in the world to get rid of it. As a result, the average Australian child is 5 IQ points higher than they would have been had those mums not fought for all of us, right? Now, to me, that's a really important model. You identify the factors that are fucking your attention in the environment, and we fight together to get them out of the environment. So obviously, when this was explained to me, I wanted to understand, well, what's the analogy with the technology? And Asa Raskin, who designed a key part of how many websites work, his dad, Jeff, designed the Apple Macintosh for Steve Jobs. Asa said to me, if you want to know what the equivalent to the lead in the lead paint is, it's really simple. There are basically 3 ways you can fund social media. The way we have, at the moment, the model, the fancy term for it from Professor Shoshana Zuboff, is surveillance capitalism. Sounds fancy, but it's pretty simple. You seem to get TikTok, Twitter, Instagram for free, but in return, they secretly surveil you, they hack your attention, so you pay with your attention. And I would argue our democracies, I'm going to come back to that in a second. So that's one model, right? There's some advantages to that. You don't pay up front in a cost of living crisis. That ain't nothing. But the downstream costs are massive for our kids, for us, for our democracies. The second model, there are 2 other models. There are 2 other ways you could do this. What Asa said to me is, here's how you solve this problem. Ban surveillance capitalism. Just forbid it. A business model based on secretly tracking you in order to frack your attention, don't allow it. It's like lead in lead paint. I said to him, okay, let's imagine that we do that. What happens the day after the ban when I open Facebook? Would it just say, sorry guys, we've gone phishing? He said, of course not. What would happen is they'd have to move to one of 2 other business models, and almost I would guess literally everyone in this room has experience of the 2 alternatives. One of the alternatives to the second business model is subscription. We all know how Netflix works. You pay a small amount, in return you get access. The key thing is, in a subscription model, all the incentives change. At the moment, if you're any of these companies, their incentive is, how do I invade and frack Hannah and her children in order to keep them scrolling as long as possible? Because Hannah is not the customer of any of these companies. TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, they've all got customer service departments. We can't phone them, right? Because we're not the customer. Our attention is the product they sell to the real customer who's the advertiser. But under a subscription model, all the incentives change. Suddenly, Hannah is the customer. Suddenly they have to say, not how do we hack and invade Hannah, but what does Hannah want out of life? Turns out Hannah feels good when she meets up with her friends offline. Let's design our app to maximize that. Hannah feels good when she's meeting up with people, not when she's doom scrolling through Photoshop bullshit. Let's design our app to do that, right? My friends in Silicon Valley could do that in 5 minutes, but the incentive has to be there. Or think about the third model. And everyone here has experience of the third model. Think about the sewers. Before we had sewers, we had shit in the streets, people got cholera, it was terrible. So now we all pay and own the sewers together. You own the sewers in Sydney with everyone else here. I own the sewage pipes in London with all my fellow citizens of London, right? Now, it may be that what we want to, like we own the sewage pipes together because we don't want to get cholera, we might want to own the information pipes together because we don't want to get cholera for our attention and our democracy, right? Now, you want to make sure that's independent of the government. Obviously, we don't want governments to control it, but there are really good models. Think about the ABC or the BBC. They're not perfect, but they're some of the most trusted media institutions in the whole world. In Britain, everyone who has a television pays to the BBC. We own the BBC. It doesn't work for the government. It works for us. It's not perfect, but it is the most trusted media institution in the whole world, right? So we could have it operating on that model. But the key thing is, if you don't change the incentives, if you don't change the structure, for as long as the longer we scroll, the more money they make, they'll just get better and better at fucking with our attention, right? That is just inevitable. You've got to break that link. And we can only do that together politically, right? They're not going to do that voluntarily any more than the lead industry was going to go, hey guys, we've made enough money, let's stop screwing up kids' brains, right? I want to talk to you about a parallel or a different a layer of attention that I'm really worried about, because we've got I think it's 3 weeks today until the presidential election in the United States. I live half the year in the US. I was just in the US, and came here from the US. And I'm really sorry to tell you, I think it's quite likely that Donald Trump will win. And I want to talk to you about how we got to this point. It's very relevant to the fact that I think it's a year and a day. We're a year and a day from the referendum here. I want to talk about that dynamic, because the same factors that are destroying our individual attention are catastrophically harming our collective attention, and democracy is the most precious form of collective attention. So you have to go back to that thing I was just saying to understand the effect on democracy. So every time you open the app, they begin to scroll. Longer you scroll, the more money they make. So the algorithms are set up to figure out what will keep you scrolling, right? They don't care what you look at. It doesn't matter to them. All they care about is, did you scroll longer? So the algorithms are set to work on all of us, and they bumped into an underlying truth about human psychology, one part of our minds. It's been known about for a long time, goes back, 70 years. It's called negativity bias. It's really simple. People will stare longer at something that makes them angry and upset than they will at something that makes them feel good. If you've ever seen a car accident on the highway, you know what I meant, right? You spent longer staring at the bloody car wreck than you did at the pretty flowers on the other side of the street. This is very deep in human nature. A 10-week-old baby will stare longer at an angry face than a smiling face, probably for good reason. Our ancestors who weren't looking out for the angry face, got eaten. I mean, it's a bit crude, but you know what I mean, right? So the algorithms discovered that if we show you things that make you angry and upset, you'll scroll longer. So they started pumping us with anger and rage. So picture two teenage girls who get on the same bus, who go to the same party and go home on the same bus. And one of them opens the bus and says, that was a great night, we danced to Ariana Grande, loved it. The algorithm is always scanning the kind of words you use, and it'll put that into a few people's feeds. Okay, now imagine the other girl opens the video and goes, Karen was a fucking skank at that party, and her boyfriend's a prick, and it just goes down a list calling everyone an ass. I don't know if does teenagers still use the word skank? I don't think they do. I've just aged myself, but we should launch a campaign to bring back the word skank. It's an excellent word. But we can do that first, then do the attention stuff. So again, the AI is scanning the kind of words you use. It will put the second video into far more people's feeds. Because if it's enraging, it's engaging. They go, what do you mean Karen's a skank? You're a skank. You'll have a fight, right? I'd like to think that you're all finding what I'm saying interesting. But if those guys at the back over there started having a fist fight, you would all turn and look at them, right? And stop listening to whatever the hell I'm talking about, right? That dynamic is playing out the whole time online. So imagine that. That is bad enough at the level of two teenage girls on a bus. We all know what's happened to the mental health of teenage girls. The average teenage girl now has the same level of anxiety as the average teenage girl did in 1950 when she was admitted to a mental hospital, right? That's bad enough. But now imagine that being done to a whole society. Except you don't have to imagine it. A society where the kind, decent people who don't want to hate each other, who want to compromise and live together, are muffled and pushed to the back, and the angry, vicious, cruel people are given the biggest megaphone and pushed to the front. That's what we're living with. That's why Donald Trump's about to be re-elected, probably. That's why my country insanely voted to leave the European Union. That's why your country could not reconcile a year and a day ago in the deep way that was an incredible historic opportunity. It's not the only thing going on in any of these factors. Of course, there's many things going on. But when countries as different as Britain, Brazil, and Burma all polarize in the same way, you begin to see that there's some deeper underlying factor going on here. And these factors are destroying democracy. So there's loads of reasons why we've got to fight now to get our attention back from the forces that are stealing it. We've got to do it for our children. Everyone knows a kid like my godson was. And everyone knows it's okay, he's not going to die, it's not going to be horrific, but he will not, if he had carried on that path, fortunately he hasn't, ask me why, but if he carried on that path, he would have been less than he could have been, right? So we've got to do it for our children, we've got to do it for ourselves, we've got to do it for our democracies, but it requires a real shift in psychology. We need to stop blaming ourselves. We need to stop getting angry with ourselves and our children and start getting angry with the forces who did this to us. Because this was done to us, so a very small number of people could get very rich. And we need to realize we are not, medieval peasants begging at the table of King Musk and King Zuckerberg for a few little crumbs of attention from their table. We are the free citizens of democracies, and we own our own minds. And together, we can take them back if we want to. Thank you. Cheers, everyone. Thank you. I'm too British to accept applause. So if you ever look at clips of the Queen before she died, whenever they would applaud her, she would go, yes. A totally blank facial expression. So, by the way, it really, you guys, it's bad enough that we have a hereditary monarchy, that you have our hereditary monarchy. Have some self-respect, Australia. But anyway, I know the king is about to arrive, but let's not do this, right? Sorry, I was told not to be too controversial, but I feel like you guys can take it. So anyway, I can take questions. There's going to be mics. I've always secretly wanted to be like Ricky Lake and go into the audience with a microphone. And I was just in Oprah's house, which you can ask about if you want. But I'm not going to do that. So I think there's some brilliant volunteers. Does anyone want to put up their hand? Can we have the first question from a woman? Because men have, controlled the world forever. Anyone want to? I can't actually see very well. So I think the volunteers are going to find you. And then, hi, so I see you there. Hello. Thank you. Cheers. I'm also going to, while you're asking a question, I'm going to do a disgusting thing and blow my nose. I've been trying really hard to not rub my nose because I wrote a book about why we should legalize drugs. And if you write a book about why you should legalize drugs and then rub your nose in public, it looks really suspicious. But hello. Hi.
Awesome talk. Thank you. Do you have any examples of organizations and what they're doing to actually combat this?
Yeah, there's so many. There's a group here in Sydney. I'm blanking on the name, and I'm really ashamed. I've been in touch with them, who are fighting for getting smartphones out of schools. The thing with this crisis is, it's operating at so many different levels that there's loads of things that we can do. And I would just say, pick whatever takes your fancy. Pick whatever interests you. This will sound a bit weird, but whenever I think about this crisis, I always think about my grandmothers, who I really, really loved, right? So when my grandmothers were the age I am now, I'm 45, one of them was a Swiss peasant woman living in a wooden hut on the side of a mountain, and the other one was a Scottish working class woman living in a tenement flat, right? My grandmothers, in that year, not a million years ago, when they were literally the age I am now, so they weren't allowed to have bank accounts in their own names because they were married women. It was legal for their husbands to rape them, as it was legal everywhere in the world for a man to rape his wife. My Swiss grandmother wasn't even allowed to vote, right? She didn't get to vote for years until after that. And when I think about my grandmother's whole lives were disfigured by misogyny, right? They never got to be the people they could have been. But they just thought, well, this is shit, it sucks, but that's just the way the world is, right? Because feminism hadn't happened in the place where they were. Obviously, it was happening in some parts of the world, but hadn't happened there yet. And if you think about what had to happen there, they had to fight fucking everywhere, in their homes, in their schools, in their workplaces when they got to go to them, at the national level. So I would say there's so many organizations. Pick a place to start. So if you Google organizations in Sydney, or you email me, it's just chasingthescream@gmail.com. I'll send you a link to the organization. But there's loads of different groups, and if there isn't one, set one up, right? Lobby the government in Canberra on a regulation. You're having a big debate about regulation now. Get smartphones out of your kids' schools. Fight against the food industry. There's so many places we've got to fight and so many organizations that I think just start whatever sort of tickles your fancy, really. Great. Does someone else want to ask a question? I can see anyone. Do one of the volunteers want to wave to me? Hi.
Hi. I'm obliging with your Ask Me Why about your godson Can you tell us the journey and...
Oh, yeah.
Please.
Thank you so much for asking. It kind of comes back to that thing about meaning. So 2 really big changes happened in his life. He got a job he really cares about, helping refugees, and he really cares about them. And he got a really hot girlfriend, who, like, it was literally like a miracle in our family. We were like, wait, no one in our family has ever gone out with someone this hot. This is really strange. But I just met with her family in America as well. It was so neat. I was like, thank you so much for your granddaughter. So those 2 really big changes with meaning and connection. He got better connections than the shitty connections you get from being online, right? I'm not dissing that there's some good connections that can come from being online, but, and it completely changed his life. And he still uses his phone more than I would like him to, but it's been an amazing, amazing change. And it's just really beautiful to see, actually. Oh, great, anyone else want to? Great, hi, hello.
Thank you.
Hey.
Hi, thank you for that. That was fantastic. I'm really curious. Many of the issues that you raise, both in Chasing the Scream and in Lost Connection, are very key issues that different governments are grappling with at the moment. In New South Wales, we have an upcoming drug summit. We have a social media summit that's just happened looking at the impact on young people. And we're about to have a parliamentary inquiry into the impacts of loneliness. Across the different books that you've written, I'm really keen on your reflections on how these 2 issues intersect, and particularly from your travels, any areas that are doing it well is a good example.
Yeah, thank you. I'm meeting with some kind of government muckety mucks, I'm sure it's not their official title, to talk about this. You're totally right. So there's like a million things I could say in response to that, but I'll give you an example of one. So as you know, there's been a massive explosion in loneliness, right? Massive. Actually, Australia is, by some measures, literally top of the world league table on loneliness. So it turns out Neighbours' Reg Grundy lied to me again. Who knew? And one of the effects of loneliness, I remember interviewing one of the leading experts on loneliness, Professor John Cassiopo at the University of Chicago, and him explained this to me. One of the effects of loneliness that's really interesting is an attentional one. When you're lonely, you're more likely to flip into a state called vigilance or hypervigilance. So the way it was explained to me, it was actually explained to me by an amazing woman called Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who's done a lot of research on this. So imagine you were walking down the street, and one day you were attacked by a bear. Right? This is very unlucky. I have to say, I'm suspicious of koalas. They're horrible little bastards. But anyway, again, another national icon. Get rid of that one. You're attacked by a bear, right? In the weeks and months that follow, you're going to find it harder to focus on like an email or a book, because your brain is going to start involuntarily scanning the horizon for risk and danger, right? That's not your brain failing to do its job, that's your brain doing its job. It's like, oh shit, something came out of the blue and hurt me. I've got to look out for other stuff that can hurt me. Okay, now imagine you're attacked by a bear again. You're very unlucky in this scenario, a bit like Leonardo DiCaprio in The Revenant. At that point, you would flip into a state called hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is where you just can't focus on like reading a book, because your brain is like, what is going on, right? Children who've been abused, soldiers who've been in war, they often go into a state called hypervigilance. So what loneliness does is it moves you up the vigilance scale. So you struggle to focus, which is why everything that reduces loneliness also improves attention. And so obviously I wrote a whole book about this called Lost Connections, but yeah, so there's so many ways in which, this really connects to that. I mean, I could say a million other things, but I've got 3 minutes on the clock, so I'll try to do one. Well, thank you. I'll do one other question. Hi. I can't actually... Oh, hi, the guy at the back there. Hey.
Hi.
I don't know if you are a man or not. I can't see. I apologize if I misgendered you.
I am.
Don't cancel me.
Just a quick question. You talk a lot about economic incentives that companies are going through, but what about the political incentives? How do we fight that? Because there's a lot of fringe movements that now became central, and they're not giving up their opportunity that just come up across the world in democracies.
It's such a good point. So I'll give you an example. In Brazil, where I've spent a lot of time, in 2017, or was it 2016? 2017. So there was a washed-up far-right politician called Jair Bolsonaro, who was hated, had like 5% opinion poll ratings, who was nostalgic for the old military dictatorship. He said that people should be tortured to death. He said if his son was gay, he'd kill him. In a debate in the Senate about rape, he told a female senator, I don't know what you're worried about, you're so ugly, no one would rape you. Disgusting and depraved man. And then the YouTube algorithm started to pick him up, because if it's enraging, it's engaging. Boosted him, boosted him, boosted him. It was YouTube and Facebook massively boosted him. The night he was elected president in 2017, what did his supporters chant? Facebook, 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 because they knew why he'd won, right? They understood that dynamic very well. He then proceeded to destroy crucial parts of the Amazon rainforest. We will all live for the rest of our lives with the consequences of what happened at that moment. Fortunately, he was beaten by the heroic Lula da Silva, who got out of prison, where he was falsely imprisoned, defeated him. An incredible moment of luck that the forces of goodness were able to overwhelm this algorithmic promotion of hatred, but that was real luck, right? Hard work and luck. That dynamic is happening everywhere. It's really disturbing. So what we need to do is all politicians are constantly making a judgment call. If I do this thing, don't matter what it is, think of anything, gay marriage, higher taxes on rich people, whatever. If I do this thing, how much shit will I get and how much praise will I get? And generally, when the praise outweighs the shit in a democracy, they'll do it, right? So think about the changes we've lived through in gay equality, right? In 1985, in this country, if you were in favor of equality for gay people, you got a small amount of praise and an enormous amount of shit, right? The police were literally murdering gay men in this city, right? Or involved, in deliberately turning a blind eye and possibly involved in killing them. And then the society changed. Loads of really brave gay people spoke out. Loads of straight people opened their hearts, joined that struggle. And now the calculation is completely different, right? Now even quite unpleasant right-wing politicians will say they're in favor of gay equality because of that change. There's a brilliant American writer called Rebecca Solnit, who I'm sure lots of you know. She said, politicians in the main are weather vanes, and it's our job to be the weather. So we've got to be organized, and we've got to demand of them that they do the right thing for our children, for ourselves, and our democracies. If we do that, they're responsive in the same way that even Trump pretends to be in favor of equality for gay people, right? So you can see how that, if you get enough of a critical mass, it becomes, I wouldn't say it's irreversible. I think the Supreme Court might reverse it if he wins again, but it's much, much harder to reverse, right? So there are these hateful right-wing groups. They are growing. They are becoming dominant. But that's not inevitable, right? There's all of us. There's the forces of the rest of the society, and even the people who are often supporting Trump. I know a lot of Trump supporters in the US who are not cruel or wicked people. People are very divided internally as well as among each other. There's a lot we can appeal to in the other side. We don't want to ever write people off. We don't want to get into the trap of demonizing our opponents. So yeah, absolutely, we need to be that weather, and we need to persuade other people, and we need to overwhelm. They've got the algorithmic power. We've got to organize to regulate the algorithmic power and overwhelm the powers of hate, and I absolutely believe we can do that. Just the last thing I'm going to say, I'm going to do a book signing in the bookshop. I have no idea where that is. Someone will tell you. But I had a really weird experience. The first time I ever did a book signing, it was in Baltimore, and the second woman in the line said, will you write a message for someone? I said, sure, what do you want me to write? She said, will you write, Dear Peter, it's over, I never loved you anyway. So I will say whatever you want, but I will not dump your boyfriend for you. You're going to do that yourself. Thank you so much to South by Southwest Vanilla and everyone here. Cheers, everyone. Thank you. Thanks.